هيا على الصلاة، هيا على الفلاح، هيا على الفلاح، هيا على خير الأمل، هيا على خير الأمل. الله أكبر، الله أكبر، لا إله إلا الله، لا إله إلا الله.
اللهم صل على محمد.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن عليا ولي الله أشهد أن عليا حجة الله هيا على الصلاة هيا على الصلاة هيا على الفلاح هيا على الفلاح هيا على خير العمل هيا على خير العمل قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إذا جاء نصر الله والفتح ورأيت الناس يدخلون في دين الله أفواجا فسبح بحمد ربك واستغفر إنه كان توابا. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربنا أعلى وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربنا أعلى وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر بحول الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد كذلك الله ربي. الله أكبر. اللهم اغفر لنا وارحمنا وعافنا واعف عنا في الدنيا والآخرة إنك على كل شيء قدير. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربنا أعلى وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربنا أعلى وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. الحمد لله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد بحول الله. سبحان سبحان الله. استغفر الله ربي واتوب اليه. الله اكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. يا لطيف ارحم عبدك الضعيف الذليل بجاه محمد وآل بيته الطاهرين. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. بسم الله وبالله وخير الأسماء لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له. أشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. As two namaz-e-wahshat, if you could recite namaz-e-wahshat or Hadiya Mayat. First one is Bilqis Raza Hussain Moti of Birmingham, passed away on Wednesday and buried today. Second one is Sukaina Sajjad of Birmingham, who passed away yesterday and buried today. Al-Fatiha.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أستغفر الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم الرحمن الرحيم ذو الجلال والإكرام وأتوب إليه. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا شديد القوى ويا شديد المحال، يا عزيز يا عزيز يا عزيز، ظلت بعظمتك جميع خلقك فاكفني شر خلقك. يا محسن يا مجمل يا منعم يا مفضل، يا لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك إني كنت من الظالمين. فاستجبنا له ونجيناه من الغم وكذلك ننجي المؤمنين. وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله أشهد أن عليا ولي الله أشهد أن عليا حجة الله. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل. قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل أعوذ برب الفلق من شر ما خلق ومن شر غاسق إذا وقب ومن شر النفاثات في العقد ومن شر حاسد إذا حسد. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. بحول الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. كذلك الله ربي. الله أكبر. ربنا اغفر لي ولوالدي وللمؤمنين يوم يقوم الحساب. رب ارحمهما كما ربياني صغيرا. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان اللہ سبحان اللہ سبحان ربی اعلیٰ و بحمدہ رب صلی علی محمد و آل محمد. اللہ اکبر. الحمد للہ. اشہد ان لا الہ الا اللہ وحدہ لا شریک لہ واشہد ان محمدا عبدہ ورسولہ. اللہم صلی علی محمد و آل محمد بحول اللہ وقوتہ اقوم. سبحان اللہ والحمد للہ. سبحان اللہ والحمد. استغفر اللہ. اللہ اکبر. سبحان ربی العظیم و بحمدہ رب صلی علی محمد و آل محمد. سمع اللہ لمن حمدہ. اللہ اکبر. سبحان اللہ سبحان اللہ سبحان ربی اعلیٰ و بحمدہ رب صلی علی محمد و آل محمد. اللہ اکبر. استغفر اللہ ربی و اتوب الیہ. اللہ اکبر. سبحان اللہ سبحان اللہ سبحان ربی اعلیٰ و بحمدہ رب صلی علی محمد و آل محمد. اللہ اکبر. بحول اللہ. سبحان اللہ. سبحان اللہ. سبحان اللہ. استغفر اللہ. اللہ اکبر. سبحان ربی العظیم و بحمدہ رب صلی علی محمد و آل محمد. سمع اللہ لمن حمدہ. اللہ اکبر. سبحان اللہ سبحان اللہ سبحان ربی اعلیٰ و بحمدہ رب صلی علی محمد و آل محمد. اللہ اکبر. استغفر اللہ ربی و اتوب الیہ. اللہ اکبر. سبحان اللہ سبحان اللہ سبحان ربی اعلیٰ و بحمدہ. یا ولی العافیہ نسألک العافیہ عافیت الدنیا والآخرہ بجائے محمد و آل بیتہ الطاہرین. اللہ اکبر. الحمد للہ. بسم اللہ و باللہ و خیر الاسماء للہ. اشہد ان لا الہ الا اللہ وحدہ لا شریک لہ واشہد ان محمدا عبدہ ورسولہ. اللہم صلی علی محمد و آل محمد. السلام علیکہ ایہا النبی ورحمۃ اللہ وبرکاتہ. السلام علینا وعلی عباد اللہ الصالحین. السلام علیکم ورحمۃ اللہ وبرکاتہ.
اللہ اکبر.
اللہ
اللہ اکبر. اللہ اکبر. لا الہ الا اللہ. اللہم صل علی محمد وآل محمد. اللہم محمد وآل محمد صلوات اللهم صل على بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم بحق અબા અબ્દુલ્લાહ હુસૈન આપણામાં જે ભાઈઓ બહેનો બચ્ચાઓ બીમાર હોય આપણે દુઆ કરે કે અલ્લાહ લોકો બધાને શફા દે, બધાની તકલીફો દૂર થાય. આપણા આલિમો મરજા મોમિનીન ને મોમિનાત દુનિયામાં જ્યાં બી હોય યા અલ્લાહ તો લોકોને હિફ્ઝો અમાનમાં રાખ, અમારી બધી હાજતો પૂરી કર, અમારા ઇલ્મમાં વધારો કર. એવી દુઆ સાથે આપણે બધા સાથે 5 ફેરે અમ્મન યુજીબુ પડીએ. औज़ु बिल्लाहि मिनश शैतानिर रजीम बिस्मिल्लाहिर रहमानिर रहीम अम्मन युजीबुल मुस्तर्रा इज़ा दआउ व यक्शिफु सू 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 अम्मन युजीबुल मुस्तर्रा इज़ा दआउ व यक्शिफु सू. सूरह फातिहा शिफाउल मर्ज़ व दफ़्निल बला.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا شديد القوى ويا شديد المحال، يا عزيز يا عزيز يا عزيز، ظلت بعظمتك جميع خلقك فاكفني شر خلقك. يا محسن يا مجمل يا منعم يا مفضل، يا لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك إني كنت من الظالمين. فاستجبنا له ونجيناه من الغم وكذلك ننجي المؤمنين. وصلى الله على محمد وآل الطيبين الطاهرين.
Recitation of Qur'an.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إذا الشمس كورت وإذا النجوم انكدرت وإذا الجبال سيرت وإذا العشار عطلت وإذا الوحوش حشرت وإذا البحار سجرت وإذا النفوس زوجت وإذا الموءودة سئلت بأي ذنب قتلت وإذا الصحف نشرت وإذا السماء كشطت وإذا الجحيم سعرت وإذا الجنة أزلفت علمت نفس ما أحضرت فلا أقسم بالخنس الجوار الكنس والليل إذا عسعس والصبح إذا تنفس إنه لقول رسول كريم ذي قوة عند ذي العرش مكين مطاع ثم أمين وما صاحبكم بمجنون ولقد رآه بالأفق المبين وما هو على الغيب بضنين وما هو بقول شيطان رجيم فأين تذهبون إن هو إلا ذكر للعالمين لمن شاء منكم أن يستقيم وما تشاءون إلا أن يشاء الله رب العالمين صدق الله العلي العظيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم سورة المباركة الفاتحة.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Friday 9 September, Eve 13th Safar 1444. Kindly recite Surah Al-Fatiha for Marhuma Bilkis Raza Hussain Moti of Birmingham, who passed away on Wednesday and was buried today, and Marhuma Sukaina Sajjad of Birmingham, who passed away yesterday and buried today, and for all Marhumin Al-Fatiha. Tomorrow, Saturday, 10th September, Ladies' Morning Majlis at 10 a.m. with Qur'an Majlis by Sister Alia Yusuf Ali. Main program will start at 7:45 p.m. with Salatul Maghribain, Majlis by Sheikh Anwer Jaffer. Baraza Corner presents a gents and ladies Q&A with Sheikh Anwer Jaffer this Saturday. Join us after the main program in the gents main hall with your questions from his lecture series. Hujjat is hosting in collaboration with Al Hadi Youth a 10-minute Instagram live series every Arba'in night at 11 p.m. titled Reminders and Reflections to Take from Karbala. Today's speaker is Brother Imran Ali Khaki, and his topic is The Little Things in Life Equal Maximum Growth. Follow the KSIMC Instagram page to join tonight's Instagram Live, which will start promptly at 11 p.m. All are welcomed to attend. Weekend Fajr Namaz program will start on Sunday, 18th September 2022 at 6 a.m. with Salatul Jamaat, followed by lecture by Maulana Kalbi Abbas, Surah Yasin, Ziyarat, and Tabarruk or Niyaz. College census is live and available online. Many of us have already submitted, but not all. Please take a moment and go to our website or College website directly and have your say so that the community needs are heard and appropriate steps are taken for our future. Brothers, kindly think to your youth who taught you fiqh, tariq, akhlaq, and Qur'an. Now think about what you are doing to teach the next generation. Hujjat Saturday Workshop is looking for male volunteers aged 16 plus who can give at least 1 hour on a Saturday morning to help teach the next generation. Teacher training and support will be available. Please speak to Ali Alibai at the Treasurer's desk in the main hall after the main program for further information. We have launched our Emergency Pakistan Flood Appeal to help those suffering with the torrential floods in Pakistan. The World Federation Aid Team is on the ground serving those in need. Please donate via our website or at the Treasury desk. Recitation requests can be emailed to recite@hujjat.org. Niyaz Fund is open. Please donate generously at the Treasury desk. Those parking in Rugby, please pay £1 at the Jamaat desk. And you're kindly requested to either turn off your mobile phones or keep them on silent during the program. Tabarruk team are humbly requesting that you be seated for health and safety reasons. We had somebody yesterday, unfortunately, who got burnt with tea. And you have a humble request to keep your belonging with you at all times. May I kindly welcome Brother Ahmed Musa from Al Ain Foundation to give us a speech. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Right. We'll have Marcia by Brother Shabar Sajjad, please.
Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. कर रही थी ये ज़ैनब दुआ राह में खाए आबिद न गश ए खुदा राह में कर रही थी ये ज़ैनब दुआ राह में खाए आबिद न गश ए खुदा राह में ये सलासिल ये बीमार और ये सफ़र یہ سلاسل یہ بیمار اور یہ سفر پابر ہے نا یہ زین العبارہ میں کر رہی تھی یہ زینب دعا راہ میں خائے عابد نغش اے خدا راہ میں ضبط کرتے ہوئے دل سنبھالے ہوئے ضبط کرتے ہوئے دل سنبھالے ہوئے بر رہا تھا بصبر و رضا راہ میں کر رہی تھی یہ زینب دعا راہ میں خائے عابد نغش اے خدا راہ میں دم بھی لینے کو تیرے جو تھک کر قدم دم بھی لینے کو تیرے جو تھک کر قدم پشت پر تازیانہ پرا راہ میں کر رہی تھی یہ زینب دعا راہ میں خائے عابد نغش اے خدا راہ میں آبلے پھوٹتے کانٹے چبھتے رہے آبلے پھوٹتے کانٹے چبھتے رہے لب پر تھا یا خدا راہ میں کر رہی تھی یہ زینب دعا راہ میں خائے عابد نغش اے خدا راہ میں مجمع عام میں کوئی ایسا نہ تھا مجمع عام میں کوئی ایسا نہ تھا بلکہ جو پوچھتا ماجرا راہ میں کر رہی تھی یہ زینب دعا راہ میں خائے عابد نغش اے خدا راہ میں صاف کہتی رہی ظلم کی داستاں صاف کہتی رہی ظلم کی داستاں گونج کر بیریوں کی صدا راہ میں کر رہی تھی یہ زینب دعا راہ میں خائے عابد نغش اے خدا راہ میں جا رہا تھا شہیدوں پہ روتا ہوا جا رہا تھا شہیدوں پہ روتا ہوا ایک اسیر ستم قافلہ راہ میں کر رہی تھی یہ زینب دعا راہ میں خائے عابد نغش اے خدا راہ میں بادشاہ کربلا سے کمر شام تک بادش کربلا سے کمر شام تک ظلم پوچھو نہ کیا کیا ہوا راہ میں کر رہی تھی یہ زینب دعا راہ میں کھائے عابد نہ غش اے خدا راہ میں یہ سلاسل یہ بیمار اور یہ سفر یہ سلاسل یہ بیمار اور یہ سفر پابر ہے نا یہ زین العبارہ میں کر رہی تھی یہ زینب دعا راہ میں کھائے عابد نہ غش اے خدا راہ میں صلوات علی محمد و آل محمد. سورہ الفاتحہ.
بر محمد و آل محمد صلوات. افسوس نبی زادیوں کا شام میں جانا سجاد سے پوچھو سر ننگے وہ ماں بہنوں کا دربار میں جانا سجاد سے پوچھو چھپتی تھی نبی زادی نبی زادی کے پیچھے کس شرم و حیا سے اور شمر کا ان بیبیوں کے نام بتانا سجاد سے پوچھو بیٹھے ہوئے دربار میں سب چھوٹے بڑے تھے سادات کھڑے تھے بیٹھے ہوئے دربار میں سب چھوٹے بڑے تھے سادات کھڑے تھے سر تشت میں رکھا ہوا زینب کو دکھانا سجاد سے پوچھو جب دخترے شبیر نے زندہ
زندان میں قضا کی آفت کی گھڑی تھی، جب دختر شبیر نے زندان میں قضا کی آفت کی گھڑی تھی، وہ ننھی سی میت بندے ہاتھوں سے اٹھانا، سجاد سے پوچھو، وہ ننھی سی میت بندے ہاتھوں سے اٹھانا، سجاد سے پوچھو۔ جب غسل سکینہ کو وہاں دے چکی غسال، تھا سب کا برا حال، جب غسل سکینہ کو وہاں دے چکی غسال، تھا سب کا برا حال، اس ننھی سی میت پہ نشان رسی کا پانا، سجاد سے پوچھو، اس ننھی سی میت پہ نشان رسی کا پانا، سجاد سے پوچھو۔ افسوس نبی زادیوں کا شام میں جانا، سجاد سے پوچھو، محمد وآل محمد صلی اللہ علیہ وسلم۔
رحم اللہ من قرأ سورة الفاتحة۔ بسم اللہ الرحمن الرحیم۔ اعوذ باللہ من الشیطان الرجیم، بسم اللہ الرحمن الرحیم۔ الحمد للہ رب العالمین، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين، سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع لذنوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد والصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين، ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين. وفقنا الله وإياكم بعلم وعمل صالح إن شاء الله، ببركة الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد. أما بعد فقد قال الله الحكيم في كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وما من دابة في الأرض إلا على الله رزقها آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم صلى على محمد وعلى محمد. Respected elders, brothers, sisters, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. To briefly just recap yesterday's final point that we made regarding emotional intelligence. One of the reasons as to why we said emotional intelligence is not found within Islamic sources, it is because it is assumed that a muttaqi, a person who is a mu'min, has these characteristics and the sifat of a person who is intelligent emotionally. The role of emotional intelligence within our lives is so that we are able to recognize our emotions, that we're able to take a step back, we're able to understand the emotions that have been triggered, for us to take a pause, for us to reflect and to react in the best possible way. The Holy Qur'an mentions a beautiful verse, إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ عَجُولًا. Mankind is always quick and hasten when it comes to making decisions. And to break that pattern of always making quick decisions, it's necessary that we take a step back and reflect on how we should or how we ought to behave in the subsequent actions or words that we mention. The role of emotional intelligence is that it heightens our understanding of the people around us. Not only are we recognizing our emotions, but we recognize the emotions of the people that interact with us. And it allows us to slow things down and to behave in the best proper way. And by doing so, automatically we engage with people on a different social level. We enhance our relationships with one another. As in, imagine the social ramification it has if we were to, for example, behave intelligently, emotionally with our spouses. Many a times, marriages break simply because there is a failure of communication between both the husband and the wife, between parents and children, between parents and, for example, other members of the community. Within your workplaces, for example, between the employer and the employee, there's a lack of communication. Emotional intelligence plays a fundamental role in heightening the relationships with the people around us. As in, for many years and many decades, people thought that there was a very strong link between IQ and success. That the smarter you are, the faster you're able to process and assess information, meant that you would, of course, reach the higher stages within society. But no, emotional intelligence is now being recognized as a far more better standard of success compared to IQ. As in, a person may not necessarily be the most cleverest, but if he has the skill to deal with the people around him, then naturally success will come towards him. There's a heavy emphasis on akhlaq rather than what's there within the mind. The whole purpose of emotional intelligence is that it brings about empathy within our lives. That we are able to care for one another. We're able to see each other. I'm able to feel how you're feeling. I'm able to walk in your shoes. And for me to be able to cater for your needs. As in, if people start feeling empathetic with one another, it has a profound, remarkable effect in how society changes. It makes me a grounded person, a person who focuses on more important values, values of empathy, values of respect, values of, for example, care and compassion. Now, Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. When he confronts Yazid ibn Muawiyah and by extension the Bani Umayyah, the regime of the Bani Umayyah, he delivers this sermon and he says, "U'tina sitta wa fudilla bis-sab." Allah has given us 6 things. We spoke about ilm and hilm, and these two can never be separated from each other. And then he goes on to say, "Was-samaha." Allah has given us the quality of being benevolent, showing compassion, being empathetic. We have been given the characteristics to emotionally connect with the people around us. And this was a direct attack against the Bani Umayyah, simply because the Bani Umayyah lacked this fundamental quality. Now, samaha is something that has been emphasized within the riwayat as well as many ayats of the Holy Qur'an. The idea of being nice, the idea of being compassionate, benevolent, the idea of being generous with the people around us. And this is not just, for example, for the leaders, because remember, here Imam Sajjad alayhi salam is approaching from a leadership perspective that Yazid, you lack the fundamental basics of being benevolent and generous. But rather it is something that we should all incorporate within our lives. A person who lacks benevolence, a person who lacks compassionate, you realize that such people, they are weak spiritually. Such individuals, they have this level of social immaturity. They don't understand the difference between happiness and being generous. And in the course, in a few moments, I'll explain the relationship between the two. That the more generous you are, the more compassionate you are, the more happier you become. So generosity in itself is a trait, it's a character. And if we fail to develop this trait and character within ourselves, everything will go wrong in our lives. To build character is difficult. To create a change within our lives is extremely difficult. Just like any other character. If a person, for example, goes through a process of being angry and is always known for his anger and his short-temperedness, it's difficult for him to move away from that. But over time, he can move away from being angry. If he develops certain strategies to, for example, control his anger, then this person would remove himself from this ugly trait. Likewise, generosity and compassionate, it's difficult. It's difficult for a person to give, for us to give our time and our wealth to other people around us. But over time, when it becomes a habit, when it becomes part and parcel of your life, then slowly you increase that capacity. And that trait becomes very simple for you. Now, within the religion of Islam, when you refer to the Qur'an and the principles that are there within the Qur'an explains that a person, when he performs an action, how do you value that action that a person has performed? Usually in our societies, what happens is, we look at the effect of the action, don't we? We see what sort of effect it has in communities and in societies. If it has a positive effect, then we say that the action was good. This is a standard that's been created by people. If the effect is good, then the action is considered to be good. But the perspective that Islam comes forward with is different. The action is not just, the effect of the action is not just the standard that you should look into, rather also the intention. That when the action is performed, it is sandwiched by two. The intention and the effect of the action. When you bring these three things together, then can you say that this particular behavior has value? So there's the whole discussion between niyyah and action. That when a person performs, for example, a good action with the worst of intentions, then that action carries no weight, even if the effect is good. And we see countless examples of this in our contemporaneous times. I'll give you the example of our billionaires. The economy is run by the billionaires, isn't it? At times, the billionaire, whoever he may be, has certain things that he does, and he gets very negative or very bad press thrown towards him. So they have a whole PR team. One of the things that they usually do after going through a period of turmoil is that they donate billions or millions, say for example, to a particular charity. And then people turn their hearts towards them and they say, well, this is generous. This is philanthropy at its best. They recognize a problem in the community, a particular challenge, and they find solutions to those challenges by donating millions. But then you question their intention. What was the purpose behind donating such a large amount of money? PR relations, right? Public relations to try and create a good image of themselves. As in, someone might come forward and say, yes, but we can't tell what their intentions were really. Maybe it was done with the best of intentions. Well, if you look at the whole concept of generosity, remember in the second lecture we mentioned that akhlaq within the religion of Islam is not something that you specify at one period of time or towards a group of people. Generosity is such that you are generous with everyone at all times. Likewise, you are generous not just all times, but with everyone as well. As in, sometimes they will donate millions towards a particular charity, but then just see how they treat their employees. Some of the rules and stipulations that they have within the contracts, then it tells you how generous these individuals are. Another example is politicians. Politicians, during their campaigns, they will go and meet all the different communities within that particular borough, for example. They will try and develop communications, they will try and develop relationships to try and gather the votes. After they are sworn in place, then all of a sudden, you never see them again. Then again, you question their intentions. They were generous, they gave donations, they interacted with us, they came with a smiling face, and all of a sudden they've disappeared. Another example is when a person wants to rid himself of guilt. Sometimes we are generous because of something that we've done. It may not necessarily be a bad thing. Of course, there are different levels of this. But sometimes because of the sins that we've committed, the mistakes that we've committed, we want to make amends. And we do so by giving donations. Classical example is the example of Bibi Zainab alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala. When they entered the streets of Kufa, and when the people of Kufa saw the children and the women shackled in chains, they fell into tears. And then they came and they gave dates to the children. What did the Holy Lady do? She took the dates and she threw it back. And she said, Inna sadaqat haramun alayna. Sadaqah is haram for us. It's a very interesting fiqh question. Is sadaqah haram for the Sayyid? If a non-Sayyid was to give sadaqah to a non-Sayyid, is that considered to be haram? It's not considered to be haram. If you want to give sadaqah, for example, with the intention of daf'ul bala, you can give it to a Sayyid. There's no issue in this. The only sadaqah which is haram to give to a Sayyid is that which is wajib. Zakat al-fitra is wajib for a non-Sayyid to give to a Sayyid. That's why we have two different types of donation boxes for zakat al-fitra on the day of Eid. But when it comes to mustahabbat sadaqah, you're allowed. A non-Sayyid can give to a Sayyid, with the condition that it does not belittle them in their position. It does not serve as a form of humiliation. And at times when you give sadaqah to someone, it can be humiliating. Here, Sayyida Zainab alayhi salam, she takes the sadaqat and she throws it away. Why? Because it was a form of humiliation for her. As in, you people of Kufa, you gave your oaths, you gave a promise, you broke that pledge, and now you want to make amends by giving us sadaqah? By giving us, it was a form of pity. And Sayyida Zainab alayhi salam saw this as a form of, maybe Zainab saw this as a form of insult, as a form of humiliation. So she threw it back. But then at times you come across certain individuals, they engage with generosity, they engage with sadaqah, they engage with charity with the best of intentions. Regardless of how big it is, regardless of how small it is always done with the purest of intentions. The Holy Qur'an, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He speaks about Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, He says that this was a person, there are those who give sadaqah during the night, during the day. At all walks of life, they just give. Remember, Imam Ali alayhi salam in the period of Medina, during the life of the Holy Prophet Islam, wasn't a rich person. He had barely the minimum to survive and to look after his family. And yet, even under those circumstances, he would always constantly give. The idea of being empathetic to those who are in positions worse than you. That's remarkable. That's you actually understanding that there are far worse people than you in life sometimes. So when you come to the whole discussions of poverty, you see, generosity is always put alongside poverty. A person should be generous, especially to those who are suffering in poverty. There's a very beautiful ayah in the Holy Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that every living creature that walks on this earth, beyond the human being, their rizq is organized by Allah. Everyone is looked after. Every animal, every insect, Allah has made it His own responsibility to look after their rizq. But then why is there poverty in the world today? Why are there children dying in the millions? Why is, for example, nations being driven into starvation? As in, if Allah promises in the Holy Quran that He sustains and He looks after His creation, then why does poverty exist? It's a one-word answer. The reason why poverty exists is because of greed. The greed of humanity, the greed of human beings is what blocks others receiving their fair share. Allah has created a system of cause and effect. There's production, there's trade, there's importation, exportation. All of this is a system designed for us to work together in a social construct, for us to look after one another. My risk is dependent on you and your risk is dependent on me. But somewhere along the line, there are certain individuals who will feel greedy and they will want more. So much to the extent that they force or they Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So much so that they oppress others and they take away the rights of others. That's a very interesting phenomenon if you think about it. There are some individuals, because of their greed, because of this desire of wanting more, and we said that the greed or this desire is an infinite, there's no cap to it. People will go and harass others. They will block the rights of others. They will go and oppress others just for them to increase their own resources. Because of certain greedy individuals, all of a sudden poverty is created within the world. Now, according to the ulama, even according to social sciences, the idea of poverty exists because of two reasons. Let's look at these two reasons. The first reason is because people do not have the ability to prioritize in life. Sometimes poverty exists because you and I mismanage our spending and our money. The lack of money management is what drives a person into poverty. There's a very interesting idea that's been presented within the narrations. Something which is known as al-israf and something which is known as at-tabdhir. Israf, the technical meaning of israf is when you live beyond your means. You're incapable of identifying the difference between a need and a want. As in today, for example, you as an individual, you don't have the money to go on a holiday. You don't have money to buy a new car. You don't have the resources to, for example, buy a house. You don't have resources to buy certain gadgets. What do? Rationally, we say, look, I can't afford it right now. Let's give it some more time. We'll work. We'll reassess in a couple of months. And then I'll see if I can afford it in a couple of months. It's common sense, isn't it? But then you realize that society, what they do is they use the card. They buy everything on credit. Everything is bought on credit. 20% interest, 30% interest. Now, when the time comes, we'll deal with it then. When the time comes, then they see themselves being driven into poverty. The greed of the human being. The inability to manage your finances in the most appropriate of ways. Imam Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala. To one of his companions by the name of Ubayd ibn Zurara. He says, Ya ibn Zurara, understand. If you want to be driven into poverty, then israf is the way. Abandon israf and you will be safeguarded from poverty. He says, if you want to be affluent, on the other hand, if you want to be rich and someone who is financially independent, the Imam doesn't say go and recite, for example, the amal of rizq or recite 2 rakat salah of rizq. The Imam says money management. Manage your finances, manage how you spend your money. And through it, Allah will open up different doors for you. The idea to understand the difference between a need and a want, and that's something fundamental we ought to keep in mind. The second thing is the behavior of the politicians, the policy makers. So not only do we, because of our actions, drive ourselves into poverty, sometimes no, it's the leaders of societies who drive us into poverty. And this is not a new phenomenon. This has existed even in the history of Islam. When you look at, for example, the history of the Khulafa, they say that different classes of societies was developed by Umar ibn al-Khattab. Certain individuals in society were given more from Bayt al-Mal, others were given less. For example, he says that the Muhajirin and the Ansar, they ought to be given more than the newer Muslims that came towards the religion of Islam, towards the end of the life of the Holy Prophet. He said those who fought in the battle of Badr should be given more than those who were there at the time of Badr but did not participate. It was more expanded during the time of Uthman ibn Affan. Uthman ibn Affan was known for his nepotism. Certain family members were given lots and lots of money from Bayt al-Mal, to the extent that he was assassinated because of him. They came towards him, they raided his palace and they killed him. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam tried to save him, protected him, but even then they found a way in and they killed him. It was much more expansive in the time of Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan. When the government came into his hands, the two cities that he targeted, number one was Medina and number two was Kufa. Medina because they supported the Holy Prophet of Islam, Kufa because there was the support of Amir al-Mu'mineen. These two cities were a threat to him and his regime. So he targeted them. One of the ways he targeted it was that there was no funding available for Kufa or Medina. People were suffering in poverty. There was no money coming into the city. People were not supported in their businesses. Benefits from Bayt al-Mal stopped. Can you realize this? That the people were suffering in poverty. You know all these stories that we hear about Imam Hassan giving all of his wealth away. Imam Hussein alayhi salam constantly giving sadaqah. Imam Zain al-Abidin going into the nights, for example, knocking on the doors, giving people bread and water. There's a very beautiful nuance behind this, is because the people of Medina were suffering simply because the Bani Umayyah stopped all transactions with them. There was no benefits, there was no money coming into these cities. Beyond that, some of the policies of Muawiyah are remarkable. Very dreadful if you look at it. Assets were being taken, properties were being forced, were bought. They say, according to some narrations, Muawiyah used to drive the people into poverty to such an extent that these same people were forced to sell their assets. They were forced to sell their homes. Muawiyah would then come and buy those homes 1% of its value. So imagine your property right now, how much it's worth. Imagine you're forced to sell your property 1% of its value. And that's exactly what happened. Farazdak was one of these victims. Farazdak was quite an affluent man, simply because when his uncle passed away, there was a heavy inheritance that came towards him. Muawiyah seized all of it. So you can understand the beauty when people would come towards the Ahlul Bayt and seek financial assistance from them. And the Ahlul Bayt never closed their hands. They would never drive away a person without them benefiting from the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. So naturally you find that poverty affects the whole of society. How do we combat and fight poverty? As-samaha. This is exactly what Imam Sajjad alayhi salam raises in his khutbah. He says samaha is a very powerful force that can destroy poverty from the roots. To be benevolent, to be compassionate, to have empathy with one another. And this is something that you as the Bani Umayyah lack from the foundations. Samaha, one of the manifestations of it is by giving charity. And we've all heard about the benefits of giving charity and the narrations associated with it. There's one verse in the Holy Quran, it's a very beautiful verse. And you know, many a times when we hear these narrations, it entices us to give charity because we want to be a recipient of those special mercies and favors of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One of these verses, Allah says, the one who gives with the best of intentions, it is like planting a seed. The seed then flourishes as a plant. It blossoms in a plant. And there are 7 parts of this particular plant, and each part has 100 seed. As in, imagine, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that when you give sadaqah with the best of intention, more will come towards you. So there's this extra motivation for us, an encouragement for us to give sadaqah. But it's not as easy as that. Because life has fluctuations. Life constantly fluctuates. It's like a wave. At times we go through a period of financial difficulties. At times we go through a period of financial comfort. And the state of financial comfort, it's very easy for a person to open his hand and give. But in the times of financial difficulties, it's very difficult. A person is more likely to close his hands and keep his wealth to himself rather than give it to others. He's suffering financially. He's going through some financial distress. It makes sense. But then the Holy Quran comes forward and says, الَّذِينَ يُنْفِقُونَ فِي السَّرَّاءِ وَالضَّرَّةِ. That those who are generous, those who have this quality of samaha, they don't just close their hands during financial difficulty. What do? They give, but they lessen what they give. They give during financial comfort as well as financial difficulties. You know, there's a particular hadith of Nabi Dawood alayhi salam, where he says, he's speaking to some of his companions and he says to them, he describes infallibility, he describes the position of the Anbiya. And he says that we as the Anbiya, Allah has given us what He has given certain other people. But Allah has given us something specific that He has not given other people. He says Allah has given us knowledge and He has given people knowledge as well. But then there is a certain type of knowledge that Allah has given us that He has not given other people. And then there's a hadith he mentions. This is quite lengthy, but there's one part of it. He says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has taught us how to manage our finances. Nabi Dawood is a king, the father of Sulaiman alayhi salam. We all know of Nabi Sulaiman. Nabi Dawood was a king and a prophet. He says that Allah has taught us how to manage our finances in the most efficient of ways. They asked him, how do you manage your finances? He says, economizing during times of richness and times of poverty. That a person naturally develops the strategy to control and manage your finances properly. When you are, for example, affluent and you can use, then go ahead and use. But if you're suffering, he says go ahead and use, but make sure that you save a little. Every month when the check comes in, you take a part of it, you use it for whatever you need, but then make sure that you save a little from it. Because life fluctuates. You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Tomorrow, some of you may go into financial distress. But then there is something that you can rely upon. And this is based on the story of Nabi Yusuf alayhi salam. When he sees a dream, when the king sees the dream, the 7 lean cows consume the 7 fat cows. He wants to know the interpretation of this dream. What does Nabi Yusuf say? He says that you will go through 7 years of affluency, followed by 7 years of drought. What was the solution to that? Management. Make sure you save such that when you enter the 7 years of hardship, you have something to rely on. That's incredible. There's money management within the Holy Qur'an. The same strategies that you pay God knows how much to learn in seminars and so on and so forth. Asraf, however, also exists in charity. As in, Allah doesn't say give as much as you want, give in financial distress. No, in times of financial distress, lessen the amount that you give. Be smart with how you handle your money. Today you're giving, for example, £100. Tomorrow you're going through certain financial difficulties, bring it down to £10. To give nothing is worse than to give a little. Salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Then, of course, the second manifestation of samaha is when you volunteer your time. It says, meet with the people, speak with them, be generous in how you spend your time with the people. Volunteer, give back to the community. Number 3, fulfill your financial obligations. Our religion is a religion that focuses on certain obligations of a financial nature. Khums, zakat, hajj even. One of the excuses that people often say is Hajj is expensive. Well, you know what? Even Hajj is meant to be expensive, by the way. The companions, they would come to the holy Imams and they would say, we can't go for Hajj because it's expensive. It's not a new phenomena. They used to live in Medina and it was difficult for them to go towards Mecca. Hajj has always been expensive and it is meant to be expensive. But when the obligation becomes, when it is active, then you have to carry it out. There are certain obligations that we ought to carry out. Wujub al-nafaqa is one of them. That as the breadwinner of the house, you have to look after the wife and the children. This is a responsibility that fathers and husbands have. Today we see a rising number of divorces in the community. Children are affected. Just because you've separated from your wife doesn't mean that you are now released from looking after your children. Wujub al-nafaqa also applies after you've divorced. Your children are still your children. Your wife may not be your wife anymore, but you still have the obligation to look after your children. Not that you see your children every 2-3 months, you buy them £500 of gifts, and then you see them another 2-3 months later. No, it has to be continuous. You have to be part and parcel of their lives, even at a financial capacity. So, there's a beautiful research that's been conducted with regards to the effects of charity and being generous and volunteering to the human psyche. The emotional well-being of the human being is enhanced when a person donates his time and his wealth. They say that when a person engages in charity, all of these different chemicals are released in the brain. Dopamine, serotonin, all of these happy hormones are released in the brain. It makes a person feel legitimately happy that he's gone out there and he's helped another person who is suffering. A few nights ago we mentioned that there's this concocted idea that if I was to enhance my resources, it will give me happiness. Islam comes from a different perspective and says that release yourself from your possessions. That will give you happiness. Islamic's perspective is entirely different. It's not the accumulation of wealth and accumulation of items and things. When you release yourself, when you give it away, you will see happiness happen. Then there's the whole movement of minimalism. People are happy when they're minimalists. Why is that? It's something to think about. It's something to actually ponder upon. So, Imam Sajjad now, when he attacks Yazid, he attacks him at a leadership position. And this tells us that a leader should incorporate all three of these things. Number one, he should be generous by giving and spending. Number two, he should give his time as well. And number three, he should volunteer in the communities. So very interestingly, there are many narrations with regards to this subject. A leader who is stingy will never be successful, and failure is planned for them. A leader who is stingy, he may have all of the other good qualities. He may have the best of akhlaq, he may be humble, he may say good things, but if he is stingy, he will fail. And the reason why that is because there is a strong connection between being a bakhil and not trusting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You see, one of the reasons as to why we're not so encouraged to give charity, for example, or to look after our family members is because there is the fear of poverty. That the more I give, I will be poor. الشيطان يعدكم الفقر. Shaitan will entice the person to believe that there is poverty if he releases his wealth and gives it to others. You know, beautifully, one of the scholars said, when it comes to salah, when it comes to, for example, ghusl, wudu, shaitan will affect you. Waswasat al-shaitan, kathrat al-shak. Yes, there are people who take ghusl, for example, it takes them hours to perform ghusl. He says, why is it that you'll never find shak when you give khums? Have you ever, the last time you've given khums, have you ever thought to yourself, well, maybe I've given less, maybe I should give a bit more? Why is that? Because when it comes to charity, it breaks the back of shaitan. That's something to think about as well. So, from a leadership's perspective, a leadership should have an open hand. Serve, to be at the service of the community. Even if it means spending from Bayt al-Mal, from the public treasury, so be it. Look after the people will look after you. The people will have this affinity towards the government. Today, for example, there's a lot of mismanagement. Money is being spent in different areas. Schooling system is failing. The healthcare is failing, but the military is rising. A lot of money is being transferred in other areas which does not affect the people on the ground. Likewise, for example, taxes. That's another issue. People are financially suffering, but then taxes are rising. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salatu wassalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa Muhammad. Very beautifully, as the governor of Kufa, as the caliph of the Muslim empire, he would tell his workers, he would say, look, go towards the houses and collect the taxes. But if you see that people are financially suffering and they can't afford to pay taxes, leave them. Leave them. First, there has to be production, there has to be trade, there has to be employment. Then we worry about taxes. If they're not, for example, capable of paying taxes, leave them. We'll come back to them later. Through that, you develop an affinity with the people on the ground. You're empathetic with them from a leadership capacity. Then naturally the people will turn to you and they will love you and they will support you. A leader needs supporters, but there are different ways of governing support, of taking support from the people. Number two, spend time with the people. Give out your time as a leader and communicate with the people on the ground. As in, is it easy to contact, for example, a leader and spend some time with them? Yes, they need to balance their time, see how many people they visit per day, and so on and so forth. Under such circumstances, it wouldn't be impossible. You'd have to wait a long time, but it wouldn't be impossible. If only the leaders of our community spend time with the people. Nabi Nuh alayhi salam is a prime example. In the Quran, there's a whole dialogue, there's a whole discussion that takes place. Nabi Nuh, he comes towards his people. He presents to them Tawheed. They reject him. They deject his message. Why? One of the reasons, there were three core reasons. One of the reasons was they came to Nabi Nuh and they said, we reject your message. He said, why? He said, because of your followers. He said, what's wrong with my followers? He says, they are from the lower classes of society. Your message attracts the poor and the slaves of society. It doesn't attract people like us, the aristocrats of society. Because of that, we move away from your religion, from your message. Nabi Nuh's answer is remarkable. He says to them, regardless of what type of people they are and the standards of life they have, they will never be abandoned by me. One day they will meet Allah. He said, if I was to abandon them, then on the day of judgment, when I'm standing before Allah, what chance is there? Or what confidence do I have that Allah will not abandon me? If I was to abandon them, Allah will abandon me. That's a very powerful philosophy of Nabi Nuh alayhi salam. And then he comes forward and he says, I do not ask any wealth from you, because I do this with the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he turns to his people, he turns to his companions and his followers and he says, look at them. They can't even afford things for themselves. What do I expect them to give me? It goes back to the concept of humility and sincerity. Ash'ath ibn al-Qais. Ash'ath ibn al-Qais, this person belonged from a family of mal'ooneen. Ash'ath ibn al-Qais, they say that he was one of those who instigated the assassination of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, alongside Muawiyah and alongside other members as well. He had this deep hatred towards the Imam. His daughter was al-Ju'da. Ju'da was the wife of Imam Hassan alayhi salam. His son, Muhammad ibn Ash'ath, was there in Karbala. And he was killed very soon after the tragedy of Karbala. So Ash'ath belonged in that type of a family. Ash'ath was the master of Taw'a. Taw'a was the woman who looked after Muslim ibn Aqil. She is the one who gave her water and so on and so forth. They say Ash'ath ibn Qais, one day he came towards the masjid and he sat alongside the Imam alayhi salam, and the Imam was surrounded by all of these different companions. When the companions left, Ash'ath turns to the Imam, he says, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, you know what? These people, when they spend time with you, it doesn't allow me to spend time with you. They block me from developing a relationship with you. Now the Imam knew exactly what Ash'ath ibn al-Qais was saying. The Imam replies, he says, Ya Ash'ath, tell me, what do I have to do with the aristocrats of society? Look at the philosophy of the Imam alayhi salam. He says, what? Just because I'm the leader of the Muslim Ummah, does that mean that I spend my time with the top leaders and the elite of societies and I forget everyone that's there beneath them? He says, I, as the Imam, I have the responsibility to communicate with all demographics of society. Whether they be poor, rich, it doesn't matter. Everyone is the same to me. He said, if I was to spend time with you, he was from the elites of Kufa. He said, if I was to spend time with you, that's not something valuable to me. And he exposes the hypocrisy of Ash'ath. Then he tells him, he says, Ya Ash'ath, understand, these are the people who wake up in the morning with the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they end their day with the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, why should I abandon them to spend time with the elites of society? Today, for example, the leaders of societies and the politicians will only spend time with the elites of society because that's how they protect their influence and power. Whereas the rest of the communities are forgotten. The rest of the people in society are forgotten. The philosophy of Imam Ali alayhi salam when it came to leadership, we miss that. The reason why the world is falling apart is because the lack of the Imam being at the top, looking after the affairs of the people. When Imam Sahib al-Asr returns, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. When he returns, you find that the Sunnah of Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam will flourish. And there is nothing but goodness that will come through this. Imam Sajjad alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. The fifth holy Imam narrates this. He says that when we began to perform the ghusl of his body, he says when we began to perform the ghusl of his body, we would see the marks on his back. He says, I saw the marks on the neck and on the wrists and on the ankles. He says 30 years had gone past and those marks never disappeared from his skin. And he would cry and lament. In fact, the narration says that as he is performing ghusl, he lets out a loud cry. They entered the room and they said, Yabna Rasulullah, what's happened? He said, look at the marks on the body of my father. As in, imagine the tragedy that befell upon Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, the harshness that he went through, that his skin was branded by the chains of Ibn Ziyad and Shimr ibn al-Joshan. He performs the ghusl, then he buries the body. There was one wasiyah that Imam Sajjad left behind for his son. He said, my son, my camel. He said, what about your camel? He says, my camel, when it dies, bury it for me. They say when Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam buries his father's body, every day he would go towards the qabr of his father. On the first day, the camel accompanies the Imam alayhi salam. But then the camel, Imam al-Baqir says, this camel would remain at the qabr of my father. It would not come back home. I would come home and then I would see that the camel would return in the time of night. He says the second day, likewise, in the morning it would go towards the qabr of my father and then it would come back during the night. The third day, it would go towards the qabr of my father. But it did not return, so I went towards the graveyard and I saw that the camel had died. And I fulfilled my father's wishes. I buried the camel. But when you turn towards Medina, you know why the people of Medina broke into tears and were shattered when they heard the tragedy of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam? It is because the Ahl al-Bayt were a support for them. Their empathy, their altruism, and their generosity is something that had an impact on the people of Medina. As Imam Sajjad alayhi salam is approaching the city of Medina, he comes across Bishr ibn Hadhalam. He says, Ya Bishr, tell me, are you a poet just like your father? He says, yes, Yabna Rasulullah. He said, go and tell the people of Medina what happened to us, Ya Bishr. Bishr ibn al-Hadhalam, he enters the city of Medina. He calls all the people. He tells them, go towards the grave of Rasulullah. They gathered around the grave of Rasulullah. Ya Bishr, what is it? He then begins to narrate these words. He says, Ya Ahl al-Yathribi, la maqama lakum biha. He says, O people of Medina, O you people, there is no dignity anymore. He says, Qutil al-Hussein wadmu'i midrar. The body of Abu Abdullah has been slaughtered and has been abandoned in the lands of Karbala. Al-jismu minhu bi Karbala in Mudarraj. It says his body has been slaughtered and abandoned in the deserts of Karbala, drenched in his own blood. وَالرَّأْسُ مِنْهُ عَلَى الْقَنَاةِ يَدَارُ. And his head was separated from his body and it was placed on a lance and it was paraded from one city towards another. They say a woman came towards this majlis, a woman with an infant in her hands. Bishr then came towards this woman. This woman said to Bishr, Ya Bishr, tell me about my son Abi Abdullah. He said, I inquired, who is this woman? They said to her, Ya Bishr, this is Ummul Baneen. Ummul Baneen then says, Ya Bishr, tell me about my son Abu Abdullah. Bishr replies, أعظم الله لك الأجر بولدك Abdullah. She says, no, do not tell me about my son Abdullah, tell me about Abu Abdullah. Then he says, may Allah reward you for your son Jaffer. She says, do not tell me about Jaffer, tell me about Abu Abdullah. Then he says, may Allah bless you and your son Uthman. He says, do not tell me about Uthman, tell me about Abu Abdullah. Then he says, أعظم الله لك الأجر يا أم البنين بولدك Abbas. When she hears the name of Abbas, she begins to shake. They say the infant nearly falls from her hands. Then she says, if Abbas has been killed, then tell me what has happened to my son Abi Abdullah. Imagine, how can you tell a woman of what's happened to the Imam Abu Abdullah alayhi السلام. إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون سيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلب ماتم الحسين.
چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے شام بازار ہی غیور کی بیماری ہے چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے شام بازار ہی غیور کی بیماری ہے چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے خون رلاتا ہے کھلا اب بھی وہ سر زینب کا خون رلاتا ہے کھلا اب بھی وہ سر زینب کا ایسا لگتا ہے سفر شام ابھی جاری ہے چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے کہے سجاد تماچے نا اسے مار شمر کہے سجاد تماچے نا اسے مار شمر میرے بابا کو یہ معصوم بہت پیاری ہے چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے کہے سجاد تماچے نا اسے مار شمر کہے سجاد تماچے نا اسے مار شمر میرے بابا کو یہ معصوم بہت پیاری ہے چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے سر کھلے دیکھنے جب بنتے علی لوگ آئے سر کھلے دیکھنے جب بنتے علی لوگ آئے مر گیا دیکھ کے ماحول وہ بازاری ہے چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے سر کھلے دیکھنے جب بنتے علی لوگ آئے سر کھلے دیکھنے جب بنتے علی لوگ آئے مر گیا دیکھ کے ماحول وہ بازاری ہے چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے جس طرح شمر نے بچی کو تماچے مارے جس طرح شمر نے بچی کو تماچے مارے خوف معصوم پہ مر کے بھی رہا تاری ہے چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے. جس طرح شمر نے بچی کو تماچے مارے, جس طرح شمر نے بچی کو تماچے مارے, خوف معصومہ پہ مر کے بھی رہا تاری ہے. چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے. چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے. چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے. رک گئے رونے کی زندہ سے نہیں آئی صدا, رک گئے رونے کی زندہ سے نہیں آئی صدا. جانے بھی موت سکینہ کی جو تیاری ہے. چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے. چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے. چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے. کوئی گستاخ نہ سر دیکھے کھلے سر زینب, کوئی گستاخ نہ سر دیکھے کھلے سر زینب. پڑھ رہا اس لیے نیزے پہ قرآن کاری ہے. چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے. چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے. چشم سجاد سے اب تک بھی لہو جاری ہے. آ کے رسیوں سے سکینہ کو چرا لو بابا, آ کے رسیوں سے سکینہ کو چرا لو بابا, آ کے رسیوں سے سکینہ کو چرا لو بابا, آ کے رسیوں سے سکینہ کو چھڑا لو بابا, آ کے رسیوں سے سکینہ کو چھڑا لو بابا. میں ہوں مشکل میں مجھے پاس بلا لو بابا, کے رسیوں سے سکینہ کو چھڑا لو بابا, کے رسیوں سے سکینہ کو چھڑا لو بابا, کے رسیوں سے سکینہ کو چھڑا لو بابا. بھاگتے اونٹ سے بابا میں کئی بار گری, گر بچھینے میرے دیکھو میری پوشاک جلی, مجھ کو زندہ کے اندھیروں سے نکالو بابا, کے رسیوں سے سکینہ کو چھڑا لو بابا, کے رسیوں سے سکینہ کو چھڑا لو بابا, کے رسیوں سے سکینہ کو چھڑا لو بابا. بال کھینچے ہیں میرے منہ پہ تماچے مارے, دیکھ کے غازی کے سر کو رہے ہنستے سارے, ہے ذرا اپنا وفادار جگا لو بابا, رسیوں سے سکینہ کو چرا لو بابا کے رسیوں سے سکینہ کو چرا لو بابا کے رسیوں سے سکینہ کو چرا لو بابا شمر سے مانگو جو پانی تو جھڑک دیتا ہے پھر میرے سامنے مٹی پہ گرا دیتا ہے بیچ کے غازی کو بیچ کے غازی کو دو گھونٹ منگا لو بابا کے رسیوں سے سکینہ کو چرا لو بابا کے رسیوں سے سکینہ کو چرا لو بابا کے رسیوں سے سکینہ کو چرا لو بابا تیرے قاتل مجھے رونے سے منع کرتے ہیں جب بھی روتی ہوں تو عابد پہ ستم کرتے ہیں کھل کے رو لوں مجھے کھل کے رو لوں مجھے نیزے پہ اٹھا لو بابا کے رسیوں سے سکینہ کو چڑا لو بابا کے رسیوں سے سکینہ کو چرا لو بابا ہے زینب ہے شام 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 محمد وآل محمد صلوات اللہم صل علی محمد وآل محمد
بسم اللہ الرحمن الرحیم السلام علیکہ یا رسول اللہ السلام علیکہ یا امیر المؤمنین السلام علیکہ یا فاطمة الزہراء سیدۃ النساء العالمین السلام علیکہ یا حسن المجتبى السلام علیکہ یا ابا عبداللہ الحسین وعلى 9 المعصومین من ذریتک علی بن الحسین ومحمد بن علی وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والحجة بن الحسن عجل الله فرجه وسهل الله مخرجه وظهورك والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته بسم الله
اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. سورة المباركة الفاتحة.